That show. My name is Jack McLean. I'm your host, and tonight my guest is Justin Dougherty. He's the Rehabilitation Physiotherapist at the Sydney Swans Football Club. He's a titled Sports and Exercise Physiotherapist, lifelong student, has a passion for all things sports medicine and high performance. Before we start tonight's episode, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show your support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Justin. Thanks for jumping on, mate.
No worries. Good to be here.
Let's dive in the beginning of your career. At what age did you discover you had a passion for physiotherapy and working in sport?
I think like most sports physios, grew up being an active kid, playing a lot of sport myself. And I think it was year 10 actually, work experience. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I knew that I loved sport, and actually spent my year 10 placement down at the local physio clinic. And I guess that was my first introduction to physio, and it sort of kick-started from there, and putting the two interests together, and sort of always made it my goal to pursue the sporting side of the physio career.
And were there any challenges early on in terms of, like you mentioned, getting sort of experience and almost opening up doors while you were doing your degree?
Yeah, look, I'd have to say that I've been very fortunate. I sort of sought out the sports physio pathway sort of straight off graduation. My sort of pathway, I sought out the local physio clinic in Newcastle, where I was studying and graduated from. That had the connection with the Newcastle Jets. They had a contract with the youth team at the time. So my sort of thinking was to partner with that clinic and start my career there, with the hope of one day sort of, working my way into that. And yeah, look, as I said, I was really lucky. I spent a couple of years doing some work in the NPL level as a physio, and an opening come up with the Newcastle Jets and the youth team, and that sort of really kick-started my sports physio career.
Fantastic, mate. That's that's great to get that experience. Was that something when you started working in the field that you realised that this is definitely something you're passionate in? And at that point, did you have a particular sport that you were wanting to work in now that you're working in AFL? Was that always sort of the focus, or are you sort of taking one job at a time, one experience at a time, so to speak?
Look, I played soccer growing up, so that was probably my interest. And I think it's funny, as a sports physio, you always have this dream, and mine was to work in professional sport in soccer.
Yep.
That's sort of where I wanted to go, just given that was my background and that's the sport I played. And as I said, I was lucky enough to sort of work my way into that and work in the ALeague, quite early on in my career. And I think spending a few years working in the ALeague, it sort of, I guess, opened my eyes a little bit to, the challenges, I guess, of working in some professional codes in Australia. The ALeague's a relatively under-resourced league compared to, say, the AFL, and it obviously comes with its challenges as well. So, I guess, to answer your question, it was definitely soccer was my initial thinking, and being a world game, it sort of made me think, maybe there's overseas opportunities, things can open up there. But having landed where I am now, I really love where I am and the structure that the AFL has in place from a sports medicine and high performance department. So I'm really happy where I am, and it's definitely I guess something that I've always sort of wanted to get to.
Yeah, and they early on, like, who were some strong sort of influences on your career as you were sort of forging your way during studying, but also working at Newcastle?
Yeah, so as I said, I was lucky in that I think I was only out of uni for a couple of years when I first started working with the Newcastle Jets and their youth team, and the person who I guess gave me the opportunity, his name is Robert Dingle. He was the head physio at the time, the senior team. And Robert's someone who he really did influence me in a big way early on. As I said, he gave me an opportunity, but also sort of mentored me through those first couple of years. It's a sink or swim mentality, but he really sort of nurtured me through those early years and taught me a lot. Going forward, I think, through my postgrad studies, I've been fortunate enough to come across a lot of great people and meet a lot of people that are working in the professional sporting world. And influences for me, I think people like, Craig Furdham and Jill Cook, who are two of the, Australian sports medicine royalty, have definitely had a big impact on, especially now, my rehab philosophies and how I go about managing injuries from a soft tissue and a tendon perspective. And even now, I work in a great department at the Swans, and there's a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds that, we challenge each other every day. And the last 2 years at the Swans, they've really had a big influence on me.
You mentioned in the ALeague, it's relative compared to the AFL, it's not as resourced. Do you think early on for the physios listening, it's good to be in those environments where you may not have as much support as some of the other codes, so you do have to maybe go out of your area and assist potentially a coach in a drill or an S&C in the gym and get experiences outside of your lane, so to speak, early on to develop understanding in different areas?
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. Like, it's the best thing I did, in that I was sort of forced to upskill. If I was just in a siloed role, where I was, just a physio doing something in a really highly resourced team, it would have been really difficult for me now. Back in the early days of the ALeague, you're sort of upskilling in sports science, strength and conditioning, as you said, the football coaching side of things. You're taking rehab drills and sessions, and you've really got to expand your knowledge more broadly, so to speak. And as I said, I wouldn't do it any other way. It was a challenge, but as I said, it's really what sort of laid the foundation for me to learn and develop my techniques, and also allowed me, I guess, to realise what I like doing the most and what my strengths were, which I would say is the rehab side of things, which is sort of where I've ended up now. So yes, it's under resourced, and I guess my advice to those listening who are starting out their careers is to get your hands dirty early on, and get out and volunteer, or go down to your local footy club and try and get your hands dirty, because yes, it'll be difficult, and the money might not be there, but it's really where you're going to learn the majority of your craft, and it's going to set you up for your career.
And then with Robert Dingle, like that sort of relationship of him being in the senior team, you working with the youth team, was there a lot of overlap, or did you have to sort of call him and contact him outside of hours to for him to act like a bit of a soundboard and for you to ask questions? How was the sort of setup? Was it a formal sort of mentorship, or was it more something that grew as you guys worked together?
No, look, he was, Rob gave up a lot of his time for me. As you said, after our phone calls, sounding board, whenever I needed him, he was always there. But the other thing was that he invited me into first team training quite a bit, just to observe and to help him out. So that's sort of where I really learned. I just sort of got to operate with him, see how he liked to do things, and learn from him that way. So yeah, it was really, as I said, that was invaluable to me at the time. I really didn't know what I was doing as a young physio, and to work with someone like that who was willing to give me the time and who really cared to sort of develop me was something that, as I said, it really did set me up, and it's something that I'm very grateful for.
And for those listening, I can imagine starting at that level would be quite daunting. Obviously, have its massive rewards as well, like a steep learning curve. And the best way to learn, like you said, is getting experience early in your career. But there would have been some challenging moments where you're looking after athletes in rehab, or you're diagnosing an injury. There's pressure in elite sport, of course. So How would you recommend for developing physios working in that environment to make most of mentors like Rob in your instance? Like how did you make the most of those sort of resources?
Yeah, look, I think best advice I could probably give is just to know your limitations. You know, I definitely didn't know everything, and I knew that, and I was willing to admit that from an early age. You know, that old saying, almost park your ego at the door. And yeah, for me, it was more, if I didn't know the answer, I wasn't afraid to call someone and be like, hey, look, I've just seen this injury, not quite sure what's going on. Do you mind having a second opinion for me? And I still do that to this day. And I think that's something that as a physio, yeah, you shouldn't be ashamed to be asking for help. As I said, I'm still doing that to this day. Still reach out to experts like Craig Purdom and Jill Cook for tricky cases. And yeah, I'd just say that if you can surround yourself with a good network of people that A, are willing to give you the time, but B, have been there and done it and sort of got their hands dirty themselves and experienced it. That's really, really valuable. And don't think that you have to do it all on your own. There's always going to be people that can help you.
That's great advice, mate. Thanks for sharing. And in terms of building your network base, you mentioned Jill Cook and Craig Purdom. Like, how did you go about developing those relationships as your career progressed?
Yeah, look, I think early on, everyone knows who they are just through their status in, I guess, sports med and the research that they've published. I was first introduced to both of them through my master's program. That's sort of when I first met them and knew who they were. And it's actually not really until I started at the Swans, Damien Raper's the head physio there, and Damo came from the AEST himself and had a good working relationship with both Jill and Craig. And I think that's where I guess the relationship strengthened. We're not afraid to sort of give them a call and ask their advice on things. And as I said, that's sort of probably where that relationship blossomed, for want of a better word.
And in terms of going from a code that you were familiar with that you played yourself to a different code in footy, did you play football growing up, or soccer you played, but did you play Australian rules football, or was that a sport that you had to learn on the job?
Yeah, look, born and bred in New South Wales, so AFL or footy isn't high on the list of sports. So that was a challenge for sure, and it's probably something that I thought was going to be a limiting factor in me working in the code, having not played it and didn't have a great grasp of the game myself. I think I sort of approached it from a different aspect in that the body is the body and injuries are injuries, and there's a lot of similarities there. And I sort of brought, I guess, my experiences with hip and groin and hamstring injuries from a soccer background to the AFL code. And the first thing I did when I was lucky enough to get the role was upskill myself in the game. Speak to coaches, speak to players, really deep dive into the game itself. What are the physical demands of the game? What's the different positions? What do they have to do? My role in the rehab space, that's really important to know, I guess, what the player does and what they need to do and what you need to get them back to. So, yeah, I guess, I lent on the coaches and the players and the staff around us that have that experience in AFL to sort of, I guess, bridge that gap.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting point. It's something that I've noticed in all football codes or team-based athletes or maybe even practitioners that have come from track and field and different areas and some people would have that same sort of belief that, and I know I would have that as well if I was going for a sport that I didn't play. Geez, how am I going to go about applying my craft to that area? But you broke that down nicely. An injury is an injury. The body is the human body. So the physiology doesn't change. You just got to learn the sport. And coaches sometimes can find that quite refreshing. And same with athletes, that you're working with practitioners that have got different backgrounds. So it almost can be a strength in some sense when you're actually in the environment, because you've got some different things that you can add and contribute to the environment. Have you found that, like with having a soccer background, maybe it might be connecting with a coach who is interested in soccer, for example, and you get that connection, or a player that also has a a passion or feels that they learn a little bit from soccer and apply that to their football?
Yeah, exactly. You know, even our physio department, we've got, you know, the four of us. We've got Alana Ancliffe coming from a netball background, myself coming from soccer background, Justin Molino, track and field, and then obviously Damo, who's had his experiences at AEST and working in AFL. So, you know, that was a deliberate strategy from Damien to sort of get people with different backgrounds, different experiences that can, I guess, bring a different perspective to things. It's always good to have that in a team. And yeah, you know, like there's obviously quite a few of the boys follow, you know, the English Premier League and the ALeague as well. And so being able to discuss that with them and give them a bit of an insight on the differences between the two sports. You know, I remember speaking to one of the players once about an Asian Champions League campaign and what that entails, and, you know, flying to Korea on a Saturday, playing on a Tuesday, flying back, playing on a Friday in Melbourne, you know, 3-day turnarounds and all this sort of thing. And yeah, it's really interesting just to see, I guess, the differences in the athletes and what they're capable of doing. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely been helpful coming from that background for sure.
And on that note, like soccer is, you know, known for quick turnarounds, and AFL sort of had to experience that with COVID the last couple of years. So leaning on that experience and knowing that athletes can handle, obviously they're different sports from a contact point of view, but the demand on the legs, the main physical stressor you could say in terms of speed and acceleration, change of direction, those sort of loads from groins and hammy point of view. Do you feel like you could lean on that a little bit and have a bit of a better understanding of what's been going on with the calendar year the last couple of years?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think the biggest thing that I realised is through soccer, you realise what the body's capable of doing. As I said, the A-League squads aren't deep. You know, you've probably got 15 to 16, you know, high quality players who play every week, or, you know, who could play every week. And so often it's the same players playing back to back. And, you know, as I said, if you're in Champions League, you're playing midweek and weekend for, you know, a 6 to 8 week period. And it's the same players playing all the time. And so you really do see, you know, you've got these 34, 35-year-old players that are just backing up every 3 days and, you know, running 12 to 13 Ks and, you know, the long haul flights from Asia back to Australia, and they manage and they get through. And so I think that's something that maybe, you know, I guess open my eyes to what's capable, and bringing that to the AFL. You know, as I said, obviously the big difference is the contact piece. You know, AFL, it really does, you know, zap the body and take longer to recover from, but also it does make you, and COVID, you know, the COVID period and change the schedule just showed that, you know, you can do it, and if you have to do it, you know, the body will find a way to do it. I think it's just, you know, it probably comes back to what you're used to doing and how you train. You know, if you're used to training 3 days a week for 10 years, then, you know, 3 days a week is what you're going to be comfortable doing. And if you throw a fourth or fifth session in there, it might be difficult, but if you build it up slowly and you know, expose the players to a little bit more training load, that ultimately that might be a protective thing. And that's probably something that I could, again, lean on my experiences in soccer, is to, you know, just because you've got, you know, an arthritic joint or something like that doesn't mean that you can't train. That's probably something that, you know, we are quite big on at the Swans, is that, you know, what can you do, not what can't you do.
Yeah, 100%. And what about from a application point of view, and being the successful candidate? So you got that with the Newcastle gig, and then Sydney Swans, for physiotherapists that are going out there and wanting to put their best foot forward. How do you prepare yourself for either an interview or maybe the first call with someone who you're, you know, applying to, whether it be the head physio or a coach that you're speaking to? What are some of your ways that you try and work on your philosophy and I guess going with a clear mind?
Yeah, look, I think the first time that happened for me, as I said, the Newcastle job was a little bit organic. I sort of went from the youth team into the first team after Rob left. And so that was a bit of a smooth transition. But but when the Melbourne Victory position became available and I was contacted about that, it was something that, it was obviously nerve-wracking to start with, but I think the first thing you can do is get your philosophy in place and get your ideas together. You want to go there and present something to them and sort of show them, this is how I operate and this is what I can bring to the club or the department. You're not selling yourself, but you're just sort of showing, this is what I believe in and this is how I can help and how I can fit in. And I think the other big piece is showing that, you want to be part of a team, you want to work with people is another really, really big thing. You're working with other people, you want to be able to lean on them and engage with them rather than just, as I said, do things on your own and have a bit of a silo view on things. So they're probably the two main things I'd say are important if you are going for an interview. And then the third thing is just understanding what role you're applying for. Just as an example, like for me applying for a rehab physio role, I wasn't really going to go into the interview and talk about my experiences so much as a head physio and push that line too much because I'm applying for the role because rehab is something I'm interested in. So that's something that I sort of pushed and sort of lent on my experiences in the rehab space of my previous jobs rather than just, I've been a head physio here for this amount of years and I've seen this and this. It was more in terms of these are the tricky injuries I've had and this is how I've managed them and these are my strengths and limitations from a rehab sense. So that's another thing, just understanding the job you're applying for and I guess tailoring your responses to that.
Yeah, I love that, mate. That's great advice for anyone applying, strength and conditioning coach or physio. Showcasing how you're a team player and you can work in the environment, like you said, fit into the environment, and understanding the role. I think we can all get caught up in all the experiences that you may have done before that point, but if it doesn't apply to what they're looking for, like you said, you've got to contribute to the club. That's ultimately what they're looking for, the best candidate to help grow the club and be able to serve the athletes. Then by focus your energy on that, then you're almost helping them make the decision, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. It's I've heard this phrase that the Swans have been there and it's play your role. And I think that's something that is vitally important in high performance and sports medicine, that we A, know our role and B, play that role. It doesn't mean that we can't, work with the S&Cs and maybe give them a bit of feedback or advice on the program, but it's just knowing what your role is and what you're going to bring to the team. And I guess, as I said, playing that role.
And what about self-development? What are some of your favourite ways to sharpen your craft as a practitioner?
I think for me, the first thing was study. As I said, your undergraduate degree only gets you so far. So the first thing I wanted to do is, as early as I could, was get a lot of experience and as much experience as I could fresh out of uni, but also I was pretty keen to get into the master's program. So I did a sports physio master's through La Trobe University, and that's something that I guess progressed me clinically. But the main way I'd say I develop my tools is just purely through communicating with other people that are working in the field. As I said, I'm not afraid to reach out to other people and ask them for advice, ask them how they do things. I'm learning every day from the people I'm working around. You got someone like Rob Innes who's our high performance manager, and he's got his background at Richmond, and I'll constantly ask him, mate, how do you do things at Richmond? How would you approach this? He's been in the rehab role as well. Shane Lahane's our strength coach and background in rugby union. Again, just asking him, mate, when you're in rugby union, how would you approach this? So that's probably where I actually pick up the most, is purely through conversations and discussing things with our network. I think a lot of people find that there's a lot of people out there that are willing to help and offer advice. So that's definitely something that I'd say is the main way I sort of sharpen my focus or develop my skills.
What about from a highlights point of view, mate? Like over your career to this point, what do you look back most fondly?
Um, I think a couple stand out. The 2018 A-League season for me was a highlight. I was at Newcastle Jets at the time, and we'd been through a bit of a rough patch. I think we'd been through two owners and a handful of coaches, and we'd gone from being sort of wooden spoon and down the bottom of the table to then Ernie Merrick came in and really turned the club around. And we sort of went on this run where we were winning more often than we weren't. We ended up finishing second on the table and made it all the way to the grand final. And it's still something that was, I look back on that as one of the best years in my career. Not just because of the success that we had, but just because of the way that the success was manufactured, I guess. It wasn't through luck, it was through design, and Ernie really brought this philosophy to the club that was new, and as I said, it really changed the way that we did things. I think the other ones that stand out are the Asian Champions League campaign when I was with Melbourne Victory. It's an experience when you're sort of playing games in front of sold out stadiums in Guangzhou in China and in Korea and Seoul. And as I said, visiting these places and being fortunate enough to work over there is something that I'll never forget. I think in more recent years in the AFL, there's probably one that really stands out to me, and that was last year when we were in the hub. We had a game against GWS, and I think it was about half an hour before kickoff. We had 4 players ruled out through being deemed close contact as they were literally halfway through the warm up, and just that whole chaos was something that I'll never forget. And just the way that John Longmire and the coaching staff just turned it into a positive straight away and said, how good is this? We've got 4 other players that can come in and do a job. And we ended up going on after a slow start. We ended up going on to win the game. And it's something that just, it's still, it's probably the highlight of last season for me. It's just this game that will probably never happen again. The circumstances and I guess how everybody sort of reacted to that adversity and sort of almost shrugged it off and took it as a positive and got the result.
Yeah, that's awesome. Testament to good leadership there, and culture for those players stepping up. You mentioned turnover of owners of Newcastle at the time and instability of staff, including coaches. For those that haven't worked in A-League, how does it work with, you hear stories of the English Premier League of new manager, means new staff. Are you contracted to the club? Are you contracted to the coach? Did you have insecurities during those phases of your job security, or if you were doing a good job, that was taken care of, so to speak?
No, you definitely don't feel safe. I think it's soccer or football is a lot more cutthroat than say AFL or rugby league, and clubs are obviously a little bit quicker to pull the trigger on firing a manager if they're not getting the success they want. As medical staff, and we are a little bit more independent of the coach, and we do work for the club, so we are contracted to the club. But in saying that, I have seen it happen before where a new coach comes in and just brings his own staff in, and there's nothing you can do about it, whether you're doing a good job or not. So I think for me that they were very challenging times where you're not quite sure if you're going to have a job for how long. And you do sort of second guess yourself a little bit, but also start having backups in place just in case that that tap on the shoulder does come. It's not something that's fun. It's not something that I hope many people need to go through, but it is something that, again, I think it sort of highlights if you are doing a good job and you're giving it your best, then you would hope that in more circumstances than not that you will keep your job, and the club sort of can see the value you add and the benefit you can bring.
And on that, it's a good segue for challenges, mate, of your career so far. What are some major challenges that you faced, and what have you learned from it, if any?
Yeah, I guess aside from that, aside from the the changes of coaches and sitting there not knowing if you've got a job or not, that's probably one big challenge. But I think the other thing for me was I moved from Newcastle down to Melbourne. My partner and now wife at the time, to basically take up a job with Melbourne Victory. And for me, I was comfortable in Newcastle. I was settled, loved where I lived, family just up the road. And we sort of decided to pack up and move down to Melbourne, which was a bit of a step I always wanted to take, but it's always, stepping outside your comfort zone is something that always challenges you. So going to a new city where we didn't really know anyone was difficult. And moving to a club of the status of Melbourne Victory with the success they'd had, and that came with its own pressures and expectations. But I guess the learnings from that was just to embrace it and just know how lucky I am to do what I do and be able to do that, to up and move and experience a new city through my job. So that was a great experience, and we're really glad that we did that. Other challenges that I've sort of faced along the way, there's always tricky injuries that you run into. And as I said, I think early on in my career, I always, I'm someone I like to find a solution, rather than sort of dwell on the problem, just try and find the solution. And you might have a tricky injury, or you have a recurrent injury, and for that 24-hour period, it's the worst experience of your life, and you doom and gloom. And I very quickly shifted my focus towards finding the solution and reaching out to other people who may have seen it before, or again, ask for advice. I think that's something that I can't really understate that enough, and I've mentioned it a few times, but just don't be afraid to reach out to other people and ask for help. You're going to be held in a higher regard for doing that than for not, and continually making the same mistakes. So yeah, they're probably the challenges I've faced, and I guess the learnings from them.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks for sharing. And on the different roles that you've had, from physiotherapist in the youth academies, from head physio, Melbourne Victory, and currently rehab physio. So you've experienced many different roles that a physiotherapist can do in elite sport. What from the rehab point of view, where you're sort of bridging that gap between acute management through to all the way taking them back to return to performance, what are some areas that you feel physiotherapists may be surprised about when you're taking on a rehab role compared to being a physiotherapist in a clinic?
I'd say the first thing is just the amount of, say, strength and conditioning and sports science knowledge that you need to have, or that helps you in those roles. As I said, I think in a clinic you may get caught in this manual therapy model mindset, whereas in the rehab space, that's still a big tool that we use, but it's very much exercise therapy and exercise progression. So I guess expanding your knowledge in that was something that I had to do from the start. You really have to upskill in your exercise prescription and I guess fine tune your rehab philosophies and focuses. It's probably the biggest difference between say a rehab role and your 9-to-5 clinical role.
And what's some of the best ways to do that? If, let's say, someone has gone from working the clinic for a number of years, and they're a really sound physiotherapist, and then working for themselves and running their own client base, and then now working in a team, and you are involved in, like you mentioned, sports science, so analyzing GPS, maybe working out the worst case scenario, knowing their average game output, and then but also being able to take them through the gym progressions, and then also, like you mentioned, it's still treat, and so you are across everything, and then in some circumstances you're involving the coaches as well. So what are some of your favorite ways to try and develop those areas that you may not get experience in the clinic?
Again, I think there's obviously the academic route. You can do things like your AST accreditation, or you could go and do a postgraduate strength and conditioning course if that's the way you wanted to go. I didn't do that. I actually, learnt on the job, so to speak. So for me, it was more about, as I said, making a network of people in those areas and sort of leaning on experts in those fields, following them on Twitter and, reading their research and staying up to date with the literature. That's definitely something that I did a lot of early on and read a lot, upskilled. There's plenty of textbooks out there that you can look for and that will give you some pointers in that direction as well. But for me, from strength and conditioning side of things, I've been really lucky to work with a number of great S&C coaches, and it's just asking them questions and picking up things as you go. In my master's course, we obviously ticked off quite a bit of that as well, which helped that skill set. But and then from an S&C side, again, it's just literature. There's plenty of literature out there on AFL and match demands and worst case scenarios and sprint volumes and all that sort of stuff. But even just speaking to a sports scientist and just saying, hey, look, this isn't my expertise, but can you help me understand what these metrics mean, or what does high speed running mean for this person, and what's an accel, what's a decel, change direction, or all those sort of metrics that you're looking at throughout that rehab process. So as I said, it's either through an academic way or upskilling and reading, or just reaching out to people that are working in those fields and asking them for their opinion or their help on it.
You mentioned earlier the challenges that the athlete goes through when they've had an injury, and particularly those first 24 hours. What's part of your philosophy in terms of communicating with an athlete once they're injured and you're looking after them, so they're in the rehab group? What do you find are some successful ways to, support that athlete, but also maybe respect their space? Like, how do you take us through sort of, the art of the coaching side of things?
Yeah, look, there's obviously, everyone goes through a grieving process, and the severity of the injury might determine how long those processes are. I've seen athletes that, might have a season-long injury, and you almost need to let them go through that, the anger phase and the denial and all those sorts of phases that they're going to go through. It's normal, and you sort of almost just have to be there and support them through that. And then when the time is right, it's trying to redirect their focus towards the rehab, and saying, hey, look, this is a great opportunity for you to work on things you weren't good at before. I always say to the athletes that rehab's an opportunity to develop. Maybe it's they might have had a leg injury and they're going to be off feet for a little bit, but you can work on their upper body strength if that's something that the coaches want to work on with them, or if that's something they want to develop. So again, it's just sort of redirecting their focus a little bit towards things that they can do and what they are capable of doing. And probably the other piece around sort of the longer term injuries is also just making sure that they do have something else to focus on. So, a lot of younger players especially will, their life is almost defined by their sport. And so when that's taken away from them, they really struggle. So as I said, we're really lucky in the AFL where there's a great support network around the players in that sort of well-being and wellness space. But, maybe it's, hey, have you thought about taking up some study, or, someone might already be studying, you can sort of say, this is a great opportunity for you to focus on that. So it sort of, helps them get away from, their life being defined by their injury and by their not playing their sport, and, get them, I guess, out of their head a little bit and sort of focusing on things that they can do, and redirecting their focus, as I said.
Yep. And what about recurrence and a situation where it might not be a significant setback, but they've had it hasn't been linear, which is, I imagine, quite common in rehabilitation. How do you go about supporting that athlete and knowing that they're still on the same timeline, or maybe only set back by a week, and reassuring them? And like you mentioned, that refocus, is it showing some video, or is it reporting? What are some sort of ways that you can get an athlete back on track and I guess give them in that positive mindset?
Yeah, again, I guess it depends on the context around it. But, if someone did, say they're coming back from a hammy strain and they did have a recurrence in rehab or early on when they're sort of getting back into training, I guess the one thing that the athlete wants to know is why. I think the earlier you can answer that question for them, the better it's going to be. One thing that you've got to, that you always want to make sure is that, that you keep that trust with the athlete and that they trust what you're doing. And I think that, as I said, it might be that, hey, look, we've done everything by the book and we've followed what evidence says is the best way to rehabilitate this injury. You've got back, and unfortunately there's been a recurrence, so we're gonna look at alternative ways. We're gonna, as I said, reach out to this expert in this field and try and see if there's another way we can approach it. Sometimes just that is enough to sort of, again, help them mentally get through it, knowing that you are doing everything for them and you're sort of giving them every chance they have of getting better. And I think the other piece on it is just around, if you set expectations early that rehab isn't linear, because I haven't seen many rehabs where it's just a smooth, gradual progression and everything goes the way you want it to. There's always going to have up days, down days, small setbacks, and also some wins along the way where you think things are going a bit quicker. And if you set that expectation from the start and sort of communicate that to the player that, hey, this is probably what the process is going to look like, that can definitely help them. And then the third thing I was going to say is just about, sometimes it's just a conversation with a fellow athlete who's been through it, and it's, knowing that, hey, you're still going to get there, things are going to be okay, and you're going to get through this. And sometimes it's just reaching out to a fellow teammate who's been through that same experience and had a recurrent hamstring, or had a second ACL injury or something like that, and got back successfully, and even that is enough to just sort of, again, get them to refocus.
Yeah, that's amazing advice, mate. And what about from the rehab practitioner's point of view? How do you go about managing that pressure and that stress of, it might be a recurrence or something hasn't quite gone to plan, and you're sort of reviewing things, and naturally there's going to be just stresses within that. How do you go about managing those stress levels?
Do you mean with the athlete or with the staff, or?
No, yeah, with yourself, and then I guess within your own team as well, high performance sort of medical team.
Yeah. So again, like for me, if something like that did happen, the first thing I do is reflect. You can sort of pick up the rehab and go through it with a fine-tooth comb and sort of think, have we done everything correct? And have we followed our philosophies, and have we stuck to the structures that we have in place? And then, as I said, if the answer to that question is no, we didn't follow our philosophies, then there's the first problem. If the answer is yes, we did follow our philosophy, then, as I said, that's when we need to be thinking a bit more laterally and thinking outside the box. As I said, when you're working in a department, it's always important to involve, the high performance team, doctors, physios, strength and conditioning, sports science, dietetics, psychologists, just everyone around them needs to be involved in the rehab process. And what we would do is, if there was something that didn't go the way we wanted it to, or there was a setback, we'd sit down as a team and discuss it and go, well, what's happened here? And again, sometimes for me to actually sit back and get external feedback on, have you thought about doing this? Or, maybe you should look at this, or, that can actually be really helpful as well, because sometimes when you're in a rehab for a period of time, you can get a little bit, narrow focused, for want of a better word. And sometimes for someone to actually almost with a fresh set of eyes just run their eye over the program, and they're going to see things that you probably haven't picked up in the first place, or again, they're going to be looking a bit more laterally anyway. So that's something that I find really helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. And it's good to get that, no matter what your role, I imagine, by leaning on others and team members that might have a different perspective and different experiences to shed light on an area. So thanks for sharing that. And then what with the getting the information from the athlete, let's say they've either just got injured for the first time, and you're wanting to work out, like you mentioned, you want to know the why. The athlete's going to want to know the why. So you've got your detective hat on. What are some of your key questions from the athlete's perspective, knowing what state they were going into from a mental point of view, or what's going on with their life or sleep, and these other contributing factors to breakdown? What are some key questions do you think are important for physios to ask?
Yeah, again, look, we're a little bit lucky in that we collect the data, so we can sort of look at it that way. You know, your wellness data, your sleep, your stress, your muscle soreness, and all that. That's definitely something that you can look back at. You know, if you're communicating with the player, it is important to know what else might have been happening in their life. You know, say it's a recurrent hamstring, and then after the fact they tell you, oh yeah, I moved house yesterday. Like that might be something that comes into it, or you know, it might be someone who is just giving birth, wife's just giving birth, and their sleep patterns are all over the place. So I think it is really important to have that conversation with the athlete about, you know, is there anything else going on outside of here that may be contributing to that? Again, you've got to be a little bit careful, I guess, when you ask that question. You've obviously got to have a good relationship with the player and not do it from an interrogation perspective, but you know, throughout that process of rehab, you're spending a lot of time with the player. I would hope that I'd know all that stuff just through general chit chat and conversation about what's going on outside their life. And you know, you sort of hope that just through general discussions that they're going to open up to you about those sorts of things, and you can be aware of it. But if not, then yeah, as I said, it might be asking somebody else who's close with them, hey, you know, how's you know, so and so been at home? You know, they might live together. You know, how they've been at home? Do they see themselves? You know, speaking to other people that are around them a lot can also give you a bit of insight, I guess, as to how they're actually going. Again, you sort of mentioned the stress and the mental and psychological state that players might be in, and you might not see that. And as I said, it might be just speaking to their housemate, speaking to their partner. You know, is there anything else going on? How are they going at home? You know, they're struggling. So as I said, you might have a player who says everything's fine and rosy when they see you, but behind the scenes they're really struggling with it all, and you might need to, you know, take that into consideration in terms of, you know, referring on, speaking to the doctors and team around them, and yeah, sort of, I guess, helping them holistically.
With that, like you mentioned, you spend a lot of time with them, and you're picking up a lot of information from the athlete, plus you've got the subjective data to lean on as well. When you're going about your weekly planning, and let's say there's a little bit of pressure with bringing that athlete back, maybe it's September, you know, from the coaches to bring them back earlier than what you would like, but you know, maybe you want a 4-week and it needs to be a 3-week. What would you be most concerned about, like things like lifestyle stress or clinical assessment, you know, maybe strength numbers in the gym, or you know, what would be some big markers that you'd feel if they're not hitting, it's going to be pretty hard to convince the coaches they're going to be ready to be able to play a full game in 3 weeks?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I'd probably go on clinical markers. So I'd be thinking of things, you know, strength, length, range of motion. They'd probably be the first things I'd hang my hat on. You know, if someone's only got 50% strength on the hamstring and half range, and they're expected to play in a week, chances are it's going to be unlikely. So that's probably the first thing I'd go to is, okay, well, clinically, what do they look like? How are they progressing? If all of your clinical tests look okay, I'd probably then start leaning on the loading data a little bit. You know, I'd be speaking about GPS, and if you don't have access to GPS, it's just probably having an understanding of how fast have they run, how often have they run fast. If you're talking about a hamstring as an example, you know, what distances have they hit, how many times have they kicked the footy, have they done ground balls at speed, you know, all those sorts of things that you're taking into consideration that might limit your decision as to whether or not they should or shouldn't play. And then I guess outside of that, there might be, you know, if all of that looks good, that's probably then you start thinking about, well, is there any other reason why this person shouldn't play? You know, if their loading data stacks up and they've trained fully and the clinical markers look good, you might then look at the wellness data and start seeing, well, is there any trend here? You know, is there stress through the roof? Are they really sleeping poorly? Is there, or, you know, are they starting to develop an illness? Is there some other reason as to why they might come unstuck if they do return to play? So yeah, I'd probably say clinical markers first. Loading data is obviously hugely important, and then probably the wellness data comes on after that.
Awesome, mate. Thanks for sharing. And then on the flip side, and last one before we go into the lighter side of the podcast, the get to know you section. If you've got an athlete that is hitting all your markers and all your clinical assessments, and they're going really well from a physical point of view, however, they're not confident within themselves, what are some methods that you've lent on in those circumstances to try and boost confidence and boost their self-esteem to return to play?
I think that's a really important point, and just sort of reflecting on the question you asked earlier, it's probably one thing I didn't say is that athlete readiness is a huge indicator of sort of readiness to return, and there's obviously quite a bit of literature around that coming out now. So I would actually say that even if you have ticked all your boxes and the athlete's saying, I don't quite feel ready, that is something that probably would ring alarm bells, and it would just make you think why. Knowing the athlete would help. You know, if they are an athlete who is typically, say, an over-reporter and an anxious person generally, and maybe they've got a bit of performance anxiety, and that's maybe the reason they don't want to sort of go back to play, then that's something that you might target and be like, hey, you know, you look really good at the moment, get the coaches involved. Look, you know, you're looking great. Really happy with how you're playing and training. With how you're training. That's probably one angle I'd go at it. You know, get the coaches involved and get them to sort of help build confidence. It's all well and good for you as a physio or, you know, SNC to say, mate, you look great, but to hear it from, you know, head coach or line coach in our sport goes a long way. And then I think the other thing is you know, again, just asking why they don't feel like they're ready, and that might help you as well. They might say, look, I know that I'm strong, but yeah, I've still got some symptoms when I do X movement, and that might, you know, perk up your ears a little bit to something that maybe you've missed through your clinical assessments, or you know, something that you might need to investigate a little bit further. But if you're pretty confident, I guess, as a medical practitioner that the injury is healed or as close to healed as it's going to be, then it's all about, relaying that confidence to the player of, hey, look, you know, we're really happy with it. You've done all these things. You almost show them their GPS data. Look, mate, you've sprinted. You've hit 100% of your max velocity. You've changed direction maximally. You've done a match load of one-on-one skills sessions and controlled rehab. You know, you've done 3 training sessions. You're ready to go. So giving them the data might also help them, you know, realize that they're ready, or you know, at least sort of boost their confidence a little bit. But as I said at the start, it is definitely something that I personally take into consideration quite a bit in that sort of return to play discussion.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. You can see how much is involved in your current role, and you mentioned how important it is to be a team player and be across all the different cohorts within the footy club, and you can see why, for not only for your sake but also for the athlete's sake, so you can lean on all those different roles in helping with return to performance. So yes, dropping gems all the way through for physiotherapists listening, which I love. For looking back at your career now, going back to being a head physio, do you feel like the rehab role is a great development role for physiotherapists to then become into a leadership position, because you've done the head physio role and then now you've gone to rehab? Do you feel like it helps being in those sort of leadership positions once you've been a rehab physiotherapist?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, probably the more natural evolution would be, you know, going to, say, a rehab role and then into a head physio. You know, for me, it was more, again, getting an exposure in a different sport and being able to focus on something that I really love in the rehab space was sort of my reason for going into this role. I think any experience, whether it's as a massage therapist, volunteering with the first team, or being a sports science intern with the first team, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. If you're in that environment in and around it, you're still going to learn and you're still going to develop your skill set. So as I said, I don't think it matters what that pathway looks like, but getting an exposure to it definitely helps. If you're going in the rehab role first, as I said, the benefit of that is you can really just focus on rehab and you know, starting to fine tune your philosophies and in clinical skill set with different injuries. So that's something that can help you for then, if you do make that step up to be a head physio, that you sort of already got that understanding and you've had that experience of sort of, as I said, fine-tuning the rehab space. And then the only other side of it comes in, obviously, is the acute diagnostics and the management side of things, and the communication with coaches and sort of managing up, so to speak, that sort of comes into it. So yeah, definitely, as I said, any experience in a higher position is favourable, and it doesn't matter what it is. Like, as I said, we used to get physio students from the university at Newcastle to come in and help massage in the ALeague, and even that was good experience for them, because then we'd run PD with them and sort of educate them a little bit on how we go about doing things. So even though they're there to be a massage therapist and to help out there, they're still going to see how we operate on a day-to-day basis. So any experience is valuable.
And all right, we'll move into the get to know you section now, mate. So we can have a bit of fun with this. But which movie or TV series has impacted you the most, and why? You can throw in book as well if that's one that stands out.
Impacted me, like, difficult one to answer. I was thinking about this, and I was sort of thinking more recently, I guess the Michael Jordan documentary was something that The Last Dance was a phenomenal docuseries, and just seeing, I guess, the insight into an elite mentality of almost how neurotic someone at that level is, and how obsessed they are with sort of getting to the peak of their sport. And I guess similar to that is actually the Ronaldo documentary, if anyone hasn't seen it. It just sort of gives you a bit of an insight into his elite mentality and how he goes about, being the best in his sport. And yeah, they're probably two that I can think of that really stand out to me as influential, just in the way that you see an insight into the day-to-day operations, but just the mentality that these people at the top of their game have.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a Ronaldo one. I'll have to check that out.
It's on Netflix.
Favorite inspirational quote or life motto?
I'm not really a quote guy, to be honest. I think life motto is probably don't take anything for granted. As I said, I've been very lucky to be doing what I do. I love what I do, and I'm very lucky to work in sport every day and work with professional athletes. And it's not something that I do lightly. I'm really proud of what I do, but also very lucky to be doing what I do, and I don't take it for granted. And I think that's something that, whether it's an athlete, physio, S&C, it doesn't matter. I think it's just never take anything for granted, because life is short and you never know what can happen. And just don't take anything for granted and make the most of it.
Well said, mate. And what about pet peeves? What in your work life? What makes you angry?
I'm going to say whinges. It probably ties in a little bit with that not taking things for granted. Probably one of my biggest pet hates is when I hear a professional athlete who gets to come in every day and kick a footy around, whinge about what they have to do. Oh no, I've got to be around here till 2:00 today. And it's like, mate, you don't really realise how good you've got it, and how many people would kill to have this position. So probably my biggest pet peeve at work is just whinges and people that don't appreciate what they've got.
And COVID-free world, which we're pretty close to being in now, what's your favourite way of spending your day off?
Other than catching up on work, it's probably I'm a bit of a cyclist. I like to get out on the bike, go for a ride where I can, but also just spending time with my wife and family, and just sort of making the most of the time together. Working sport, days off are few and far between at times. So it's probably spending time with your loved ones and your family as much as you can, when you can.
Yep. And what about favourite holiday destination?
Favourite holiday destination? I'd probably say Italy. I've only been over there once, but absolutely loved it. And the architecture, the food, everything about Italy, I loved. And it's probably first on my list to head back over when we're able to.
Right, absolutely. It's definitely on my list. I haven't been there yet, and I've heard it's fantastic. So, have to get there at some point. Well, thank you so much for jumping on and sharing with us your experiences in elite sport and how you've got the opportunities that you've worked hard for, and also some things that have worked for you in your field and in the experiences you've got, and also some learnings as well. So, no doubt for physios, S&Cs, anyone that wants to elite sport, it's been massively beneficial. I know I've learned a lot from it, mate. So thanks so much for jumping on, and hopefully some developing athletes as well will have a bit more awareness of when they next whinge, to how good they've actually got it. Couldn't agree with you more, mate. That's definitely a pet peeve of mine. But talk us through what are you excited about for 2022? What's on the horizon for you?
I think obviously work-wise, it's seeing just how far this young bloods can go. Seeing how far this team can take it this year. That's something that I'm definitely excited about. And outside of that, it's probably international travel again, which has just been off the radar for a while. So looking forward to hopefully getting away overseas in the off season.
And for those that want to reach out and maybe ask any questions or get in touch, what's the best way to connect with you? Is it socials, email?
Probably through, shoot me a message on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way to contact me. I check it, semi-regularly. So, send it through. Just preface it by saying it might take me a couple of days to get back to you, just given travel, etc. So, LinkedIn's probably the easiest way, mate. But I'll flick through my email to you after this, and people are more than welcome to contact me via email as well.
Easy. Now we'll add the LinkedIn in the show notes for anyone listening while driving. Thanks again, mate, for jumping on. For those that are tuned into the live show later on in the podcast, make sure to listen to the very start. You can watch this. It's on our YouTube channel, and then we'll be releasing it on our podcast on Tuesday next week. So stay tuned. We'll release the podcast on Tuesday, and you'll have access to that in any of your favorite podcast directories. But thanks again, Justin, for jumping on, and looking forward to seeing what the Bloods can do, and hopefully have some success, and Hayden can get involved with it as well. So thank you so much for jumping on, and looking forward to seeing what you can do for the rest of your career as well, mate. No doubt it's only the very beginning of a great career in elite sport.
Awesome, mate. Thanks for having me, and take care.
Awesome, mate. And for those that want to watch our next live chat, we're actually going to do a monthly collaborated event with AFL high performance managers next Friday. So that'll be the 29th of April. It'll be at the same time at 8:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So we'll post a link on our socials. We'll see you guys then.